A team that is going to get the guy, though, is the Washington Wizards now. Last night, in a surprising win of the lottery, they locked up the number one pick, which, will definitely be used on John Wall. I don't think there's any argument there. Somehow they'll find a way for Wall and Arenas to play together, in my opinion, because Wall is about 6'4", 6'3", and then Arenas is 6'3". So you have two guys there who can play either shooting guard or point guard on the defensive end. It's not like they're lacking a lot of size there. And in today's game, most of the shooting guards are just around 6'4" to 6'5" anyway. So, but here's the deal with Washington is they still just don't have a good roster. Wall will make them have a better roster, and yeah, they'll get a decent second round pick, but they're just really young and really raw. Their starting five looks like it's going to be JaVale McGee, who's a good block shot type center and a good athlete, but he doesn't really have any post moves. Then you move to the power forward and you have Andre Bloch, who's a really skinny guy, so he's not going to be a big-time rebounder ever. He's kind of like a Rashard Lewis type player. He does get some block shots, which is nice. And then you move to your small forward. That would likely be Al Thornton, who is also a good scorer. And then you have probably Arenas at the shooting guard and then Wall at the point guard. So there's a lot of offensive talent in Washington. I just don't think their defense is very good. They really need to add somebody who can create defense for them almost by themselves, which, that's not very possible. There's not too many players like Dwight Howard, Ron Artest, and Kevin Garnett out there, but they kind of need a guy like that. Wall's not a bad defender. He has a little bit of that Rajon Rondo in him where he can get quick steals and get to the other end for turnover baskets, but he can't do it alone. So they're going to have to get some guys on the bench who can come in and stop the other team from scoring if necessary. A team that I really feel like benefited from the lottery, though, was the Philadelphia 76ers, who also jumped way up in the draft there to get the second pick. And I believe Evan Turner will go there, so they're a team that will really, really benefit from Turner's presence because it honestly gives them a guy who can create an offense for them. Not saying that Drew Holiday isn't a solid point guard, but adding that extra player who can create assists and whatever else is necessary. They have a lot of talent in that starting five now. You get Drew Holiday, who's a great lockdown defensive point guard already at this point in his career. He's also a guy who's very, very fast, who can get quick layups. He just needs to develop his jump shot a little bit, but he's got great form already, so I don't think he's too far from that. Add in Evan Turner, who's got a lot of Brandon Roy in his game. I think he'll be a guy who can almost step in immediately and have an all-star talented type season. And then you have Andre Iguodala at the small forward, who's, been in the league for quite some time and isn't necessarily a superstar type player. I'd say he's a star. He just doesn't, he's never really broken that next plane, but he is a very good player. You have Elton Brand at the power forward, who's always a good offensive player as well as a good power forward. And then you have Samuel Dallenberg at your center, who is a great defensive big. That's just really a good starting five, and I like their bench depth as well. You have Jason Smith, who you took in the first round a couple seasons ago, who's a good scoring center. You have Lewis Williams, who can come off the bench, who can create a lot of offense, as well as Jody Meeks, who's similar to Lou Will, just a little bigger. Then you have Thaddeus Young, who's a guy I really feel like will develop himself into a starting type small forward. He's got a lot more going on for him than Andre Iguodala did at this point in his career, and he came out as a freshman from Georgia Tech. So he's still developing, and I like a lot of what he can do. And then you have Jason Capono as well off the bench, who is a good three-point option. One more player I'd like to talk about is Maurice Spates, who I felt like has really kind of establishing himself as a good center. So really at every position, they have a guy who can come in and play well for them. I really like, if Philadelphia gets Evan Turner, I believe that will be their pick, how they might be able to break into that next playoff level. I think you could see them somewhere in the 6 to 7 range, maybe jumping to a 5 seed next year. But I think Philadelphia will for sure be a playoff team next year. Another thing about playoffs, though, and I want to move to this, and I know that was kind of an awkward transition, is I want to talk a little bit about the NHL playoffs. For those who didn't see the scores last night, Chicago was able to beat San Jose, taking both games in San Jose, now going back to Chicago for the next two, and will probably end up winning that series at home, I'd imagine, although they had played better on the road in the playoffs this year. And then you had Montreal losing to Philadelphia in Philly, so they're now down 2 games. I really feel like, though, that the NHL would benefit from seeing Chicago and Montreal in the final. It feels like at this point Chicago is pretty much the surefire pick there. Montreal hasn't looked very good, though, but they would bring in the Canadian market to the game. They'd give Canada their first shot at a Stanley Cup since 1992, when the Canadians actually won it then as well. But really, Philadelphia has kind of taken command of that series. You know, it's kind of a boring series for the most part. Not a lot of people are watching it because it is a 7-8 type game. But if the Canadians were able to come back and win that somehow, you do have the ability to sell the underdog thing because they are an 8 seed. They really need Mike Camilleri to step up like he did in the first 2 rounds. He had 12 goals through 14 games, and he just really hasn't done anything since. Yaroslav Halak hasn't been playing nearly as well. He was saving 93% of his goals. That's gone down just a bit. But here's what Chicago's going to bring to the Stanley Cup Finals, and they have more star power, I believe, than any team in the NHL. You have Patrick Kane, you have Jonathan Toews, who are both young guys who are right around their 20s, who have already established themselves as 2 of the better players in the NHL. You have Marian Hossa, who's been here for years as one of the better players in the league. And then you have another young defenseman in Duncan Keith, who is also a good player. And then you also add in that Chicago's bandwagon could probably stand hand-to-hand and line up from Chicago all the way to the Mexican border in Texas. That's a little bit of an overstatement, but there are a lot of people supporting the Blackhawks right now. So the NHL really needs them in the Stanley Cup Final to bring any sort of ratings. You know, Philadelphia's not a bad market. I just don't think that they'd bring what Montreal would. And I'm not saying either, though, that San Jose doesn't have stars. You know, they do have Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, Danny Heatley, Dan Boyle, and Evgeny Nabokov. So they have a lot of established talent there. They just don't have that sex appeal, kind of, that Chicago has in regard to selling it to sports fans. So if Chicago makes the final, and I believe they will, the NHL could be fine. They might be able to steal away some of the viewers from the NBA Finals because the NBA is looking at a series that will probably either involve the Lakers and Celtics or the Lakers and Magic, which was already a final series that they had a few seasons ago and last season. So they could bring in something. It's a new look for the NHL, but really, I feel like regardless, the NBA will still get the ratings. However, I do think that it will be a fun series watching Chicago. Hopefully they can get the Stanley Cup for that town. It's a town that really is championship hungry, and a group of sports fans who just, you know, live and die by their teams year in and year out. And most of the time they do die because their teams tend to struggle. So I'd like to see the Blackhawks get that title for their town and host the Cup for the first time in a really, really long time. That's all I've got for today, though. I really hope you guys enjoyed the program. I hope I didn't have too many stutters. This is my first time recording a podcast. I hope you enjoyed, though, and I hope you listen in, as I'll be bringing you about 1 of these or 2 of these every week. Thanks again. Remember, this is Shear Sports Cuts with Adam Shear, and I appreciate your time.